Things are so chaotic in 2025, I think it's time to smoke the peace pipe. Welcome to Time Out with PC. I'm Pastor Cherie. Thank you for joining me today. Our subject today is you can be a peacemaker. Now, Jesus, probably his most famous sermon in the Bible, called the Sermon on the Mount, he focused on the hearts of the people who were listening to them and brought up a really important subject to his disciples. We call it the Beatitudes. He called us to be different from the way the world is and see things from God's perspective. So we're going to be talking about a lot of that today, how to relate to people in a supernatural way. So Jesus was always challenging. I love this about Jesus, always challenging the normal human perspective. And so we're going to take a look at what he had to say. But let me just say something from relating to people in a supernatural way. I remember as a young child, I used to spend the summers with my grandmother. And she ran a daycare nursery, and she used to drive around and pick up the kids in the morning. And I would ride in the car with her, and she'd be driving along just singing, praising the Lord. And maybe somebody would give her one of those bad hand signals, and she's riding along just praising the Lord. She'd smile and just wave at him. So, I would look at this angry person and be a little concerned, but her reaction was different. She just smile and wave, and all of a sudden they were so shocked by a different response that they kind of dropped their bad attitude. So, Jesus is trying to teach us how to take people by surprise with a different approach. So in Matthew 5, chapter 9, here's what Jesus said. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God." So Jesus is prioritizing the human responsibility of reconciliation in this statement, showing that peacemaking is actually an assignment if you're a child of God. Wow. So peace is often hard won. It's true. And it came at a great cost because Jesus sacrificed his life so that we might have peace. Listen to this prophetic verse from Isaiah chapter 53. This is the sacrifice Jesus paid so we could have peace. He said, "But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed." Now that's an amazing promise. Jesus suffered. A lot of people think about, he died so I could be born again. He died so that I could receive healing. But how many of you realize that he died so that you could have peace? That was one of his missions in life. So a peacemaker is willing to give up their perceived rights as they're pursuing a path of seeking and advancing harmony among people, among nations, among families, so that they can experience peace through God's love. Now, don't you know, peacemakers are really needed today. But first of all, we have to have peace before we can become a peacemaker. So that means receiving Jesus, accepting the reconciliation, the separation that we had with God. And now God is our Father. And so peace is the result of a forgiven heart. Sometimes, we get so caught up with emotions and anger and resentments that we forget that God has given us this gift of peace, and it belongs to us, and it can rule in our hearts, and we can be perceived as a peacemaker. Now, being a peacemaker means becoming the one who initiates the reconciliation of conflict between others. And us. So this is part of what I call the family business. Remember, he said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God." So this is God's family business. And don't forget, Jesus left us one all-inclusive commandment: to love him and love one another. So all of this goes right along with being a peacemaker. So in a world today where groups of people are at odds with each other, and our calling is actively seeking to resolve conflicts. You know, when people just can't get along, a lot of times they bring in a third party, a mediator. So instead of choosing sides, you know, being on one side or the other, there's a third side, and the third side is being the mediator, taking God's part. So think about it. So many people are at odds with each other because their opinions are so extreme and so opposed, you know, from one end spectrum to the other. And so a lot of people make their opinions a precondition for loving someone, for being, involved in a group of people, and they end up alienating one another. And much of what people are fighting about doesn't make any sense. It doesn't even matter. But what Jesus said, by this will all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another, not fighting with one another. So it's not enough to love peace or desire peace, but we must become peacemakers. And I just have to say, reconciliation is a beautiful thing. I want to tell you a little story. You know, just a few weeks ago, my sister was sharing with me a story about a friend that she had that she grew up with, in grade school. Now, this friend, they've stayed in communication, they've stayed in touch, they've taken vacations together. And my sister had just recently returned from a trip all the way out to Oregon from Virginia or Oklahoma, where she lives now, to visit this friend. And they just had a great time. She went there to help her, to help accomplish things for her. And then she came back, and then a subject came up concerning the political picture that we have today. And her friend just canceled her because her opinion was different from my sister's opinion. And so, you know, it was very hurtful. She just canceled the relationship and said, I don't ever want to hear from you again. I don't ever want to have anything to do with you again. And she was like so in shock, but she was able to pull herself together. And what her answer was, it seems like her opinion was more important than the relationship. Wow. So think about all of the stress and the arguing and the fussing and the fighting, one side opposed to another. And Jesus is calling us to be peacemakers, to get in the middle of the group and say, okay, guys, it's time to lay your rocks down, lay your swords down, lay everything down, and let's smoke the peace pipe. Wow. So here's the bottom line. Peace doesn't just happen. It takes work. So we're going to come to peacemaking, and I want to we're going to talk a little bit more about it because I can't get it all done in one podcast. But let me just leave you with 5 tips that makes peacemaking possible. Number 1, you take responsibility for reconciliation. So many times, everybody's waiting on the other person. Take the first step. Avoid sweeping generalizations about others. You know, because in that generalization, putting them in a box or a category, you really limit the ability to communicate and get along. Cultivate a gentle spirit. Wow. Be somebody that when they're in trouble, they're having an issue, they want to call you up to hear the peacemaker's position, right? Be patient with others and with yourself. This is all part of becoming a peacemaker. You can be a peacemaker. Don't vent about others, because all that does is churn up resentments, remind you of bad things, and set your teeth on edge. So be patient, don't vent, and take time out to check your peace temperature. Hey, thank you for joining me today on Time Out. And I just want to ask you to do me a favor. Would you please subscribe, like, or share this podcast with others so we can spread the word?